I don't know about you, but one of my favorite AR setups is an 11.5-inch upper. That shorter barrel provides you the ability to rapidly engage close range targets, but it also gives you enough barrel length and velocity to push out to distance if needed. One of my earliest videos on the channel, I actually pushed this exact upper out to almost 800 yards with pretty solid consistency. Really cool. Check it out if you haven't seen it. Now recently, I released my Eotech Exps3-4 video where I tested the BDC performance of this optic on a 14.5-inch upper, which is calibrated for. We had great results, made impacts all the way out to 600 yards with relative ease. Since that video has launched, I have received a handful of comments and a ton of messages on Instagram around how this BDC matches up with other setups. Different ammunition, different barrel lengths, you name it, folks have messaged me asking to test it. So one of the first things I could test is barrel length. So I decided to take this same Eotech Exps3-4, slap it on top of my 11.5-inch barreled upper, run some Hornady Black ammunition, and shoot out to 600 yards, and see how the BDC matches up to the performance of this 11.5-inch upper. So if you like the sounds of that, stick around. From here, we're going to move into a gear review where we'll take a close-up look at the setup we're going to run in this video. Then we'll move down, and again, we'll shoot that 50, 200-yard zero to see how that compares for an 11.5-inch barrel. And then we'll move out and shoot steel at 4, 5, and 600 yards to see if the BDC holds relatively true for this setup out to distance. So if you like it, stick around. It's going to be super fun. So before we start shooting, how about we take a quick look at the gear we'll run in this video. For a rifle, I've got my factory Knights Armament SR15 11.5-inch SBR rifle. I've owned this thing for years. It's a great shooter. I love shooting it. For a suppressor, I've got the Knights QDC CQB can. Again, I bought this when I bought the rifle, owned it for a long time and have a ton of rounds through it. For a bipod, we're going to run the Acutac, which I've had a ton of great luck with. It's a very sturdy bipod, nice wide footprint, really makes it easy to shoot for precision. For a stock, we've got the B5 precision stock with a bag rider on it. So as far as accuracy goes, this should be a very capable package that should shoot as well as I can. So I'm not the world's best shooter, but I think we should be able to showcase what this setup is capable of as it's set up. For the optics package, certainly we've got the Eotech Exps3-4. And again, that Eotech has a bullet drop compensating reticle in it. So the center dot is for 50, 200-yard zero, which we'll test that here in the video. The next dot down is for 400 yards, the next dot down 500, and the bottom dot is for 600 yards. Now it's important to note the calibration on this Eotech is set up for 62 grain M855 ball ammunition out of a 14.5-inch barrel. So in theory, that 14.5-inch barrel would have quite a bit more velocity than my 11.5-inch barrel, so it's going to be super fun to see how this stacks up on steel. If you remember back to my 14.5-inch video that I shot this, it actually paired up very well, even though I was shooting 223 pressure ammunition versus 5.56. Now, for a magnifier, I'm running the Eotech G45, which is a 5x magnifier. It's got decent glass in it, field of view is fine. Very effective to be able to throw behind a 1x optics and engage targets out to distance. My goal with this setup is to make hits out to 600 yards, which is what we're calibrated for. Now for ammunition, it's going to be the same thing we ran in the 14.5-inch video, which is Hornady Black, 62 grain, 223 pressure ammunition. Again, I really can't shoot steel out here because it'll spark and I don't want to risk a fire. So this is the only 62 grain ammo that I could find locally. Unfortunately, it's 223 pressure versus 5.56. So it's going to be really interesting to see. 223 pressure is a little bit slower than 5.56, which is where we're calibrated. And my 11.5-inch barrel is 3 inches shorter than the 14.5 that this is calibrated for. So really fun to test this out and see, am I able to use the BDC in this Eotech with this package to make hits out at distance? So from here, let's move down and we'll shoot groups at 50 yards and then 200 yards on cardboard to compare that zero. And then we'll move out to steel and shoot at distance until we either can't make hits or until we make it all the way to 600 yards. So if you like the sounds of it, stick around. It's going to be super fun. So really quick before we start shooting, I wanted to take just a minute and share something really cool that my friends at Lazy T Ranch are doing this fall. So they're putting together a wounded veteran hunt to give back to those that have served our country and given so much. So if you or someone you know would love this opportunity, hop online to lazyt.com, navigate to the Wounded Veteran tab, and register. So the winner will be chosen on July 4th, and they're accepting registrations through the end of June. Now, what'll you get if you win? You'll get access to this ranch, which is a little over 70,000 acres. You'll get a couple days of guided elk hunt where you're sure to land on a monster. There's a ton of gear providers that have stepped up to sponsor the event, and they're going to give away some really cool gear. I'll even be here to help you dial in the rifle and scope and make sure you feel confident in taking the shot. So if there's someone that you know that would love this opportunity, or you would, make sure and hop online and get registered. Now with that, let's get back to the shooting. We're up at 50 yards with the SR-15 11.5-inch rig. I'm zeroed at 50 yards. I'm going to put 5 rounds on the top dot so you can see where we're impacting. And then we'll move back to 200 yards and compare our 50 200 yard zero performance. So from what I can tell, there's at least a couple in the orange dot and then a couple right around the edge. So it looks like a solid 50 yard zero. From here, we'll move back and look at where that lands for 200 yards. Center dot, center of the bottom orange dot out there at 200 yards. And we'll put 5 rounds and we'll take a close-up look. And that was 5, we didn't lock back. Let's run up and take a close-up look and compare our 50 200 yard zero performance. We just finished shooting the 11.5-inch SR-15 at 50 and 200 yards. So I wanted to give you a close-up look of what the group actually looked like. So at 50 yards, you can see we have a nice little group right there. It measures roughly 1 inch, or I'd call it 2 MOA. And in my opinion, that's decently zeroed. I'm not going to make any changes as a result of that performance. At the 200 yard group, you can see we're about a 5-inch wide group, or roughly 2.5 MOA. So things opened up just a little bit, but still very capable for a combat rifle. Elevation wise, you can see we're just a little bit high at 50 yards, but then at 200 yards, we're spot on. So really great performance from the 50 200 yard zero using the center dot out of the Eotech from the 11.5-inch barrel. From here, we'll push back to 400 yards on steel and take a look at how the BDC runs on the 11.5-inch rifle. 400 yards with the 11.5-inch SR-15. Remember, in this reticle, 400 yards is the first dot down below the center dot. So I'm going to put that on the black dot on the torso, and we'll send a handful of rounds and see if we can connect. Feels rather calm out, so hopefully a dead-on hold will work. Impact. 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 The right edge. Back. Impact. Should be it. So we got 6 impacts out of 7 rounds. It looks like they're just a little bit low in the belly. Let's take a close-up look at the rounds we just fired from 400 yards from the 11.5-inch SR-15. So I was using my second dot down to hold dead center of this black dot. And you can see I got 6 impacts out of 7 rounds fired. 1 round just went off the edge there. But if you look at the bulk of this group, we're low by about, I'm going to call that 8.5 to 9 inches. So trending just a little bit below the BDC dot, but very capable of putting rounds on a full-size torso. 500 yards with the 11.5-inch barrel. I've got a handful of rounds loaded up. still have the full-size IPSC down there with the black dot. So for this, I'm going to use the second dot down, but I am going to favor right edge of plate because there is a slight right to left out there, but elevation will be held with the black dot. Oh, off the right edge, so just need to go dead on. Impact. Didn't lock back. We had one miss. The rest were impacts. Let's take a close-up look. Here we are with our steel target that we just shot at 500 yards with our 11.5-inch SR-15. You can see we landed, I want to say 7 impacts out of 8 rounds fired. So solid shooting. We had one miss that went just off of the edge due to maybe a wind call or a wrong wind call on my part. You can see this group, I just measured it at 10 inches. The bulk of the group is running about, I'm going to call that 11 inches low. So tracking just below the BDC dot in the Eotech reticle, but again, very capable of putting rounds on a torso. 11.5-inch SR-15 at 600 yards. So I got a handful of rounds loaded up. Still have the full-size IPSC down there with the black dot. For 600 yards, I'm going to use the bottom dot in the Eotech BDC. And it's super calm out. I'm going to send this first round with the bottom dot on the black dot of the torso. Impact. Wow, can't even see it. I believe that dropped a little bit low. Then one more with the same hold. All right, so those are dropping low. So what I'm going to do is bring my dot up to head height. So my dot is now going to be holding in the head of the torso. Impact. Like off the low left. Off the right. I'm going to keep my aiming point in the head. Impact. Impact. I believe that was the last round. So a little bit more difficult to connect with this 11.5-inch barrel. Let's go take a close-up look and see where we actually hit on the plate because I can't see it from here. Here we are at our 600-yard target that we just shot with our 11.5-inch SR-15. Now, as you saw in the video, we had a little bit more trouble connecting with that 11.5-inch barrel than we did with the longer 14.5-inch, but as you can see, we still connected 50% of the time to include a first round hit. I started out by holding my dot dead center of the black circle. I got a low impact. We'll have to look at the GoPro and see. I'm guessing it's probably this one. Then the next couple of rounds slipped under the plate, and then I adjusted my point of aim to putting my dot in the head. And I'm guessing probably these 3 rounds right here would be the ones that landed on the plate holding in the head. So if we measure that out, I'm going to say the group is trending about 24 inches below the dot out here at 600 yards with the 11.5-inch barrel using the 600-yard dot in the BDC on the Eotech. So while possible to make hits, definitely need to be aware of the drop with the shorter barrel versus the BDC dot. So that's going to conclude the shooting portion of the video. You got to let me know down in the comments, what did you think about the performance of this rifle and ammunition setup against the BDC of the Eotech? Myself, I was pretty impressed. Really nice performance out of this package. Really easy to make hits all the way out to 500 yards, and as you saw, very capable out to 600 yards. So while you're letting me know down below your thoughts, let's chat about what I saw shooting this rig. So first things first, we went ahead and shot the center dot at the 50-yard line to check our 50-yard zero. And as you can see, decent group, maybe 2 MOA or so, just a little bit high. Then I pushed out to the 200-yard line, making no adjustments, and shot a group at 200 yards. And here this group measured about 5 inches or 2.5 MOA. So very respectable for a combat type rifle. And as you can see, point of aim, point of impact at 50 yards, a little bit high. And then at 200 yards, elevation-wise, almost spot on. So really happy with the performance of the 50, 200-yard zero out of this 11.5-inch barrel with the 62 grain ammunition. Then next, we decided to push out and shoot some steel using the BDC and the Eotech. So for 400 yards, I used the first dot down to connect at 400 yards. I held this 400-yard dot on the black dot of the torso, which was, say, upper third, and I landed multiple impacts about 10 inches below my point of aim. So point of aim was upper chest, impacts were about 10 inches low or mid-belly area. So very effective on a torso, but we really started to see that point of impact trending low due to the lower velocity from the shorter barrel and the .223 pressure ammunition. From there, we pushed out to 500 yards where I used the next dot down. And again, at 500 yards, we were very effective. Multiple hits out there. It was really no problem, pending windage. Again, though, you saw those impacts landing about 10 inches low, maybe a foot low below my point of aim. So if you're going to try to push this 11.5-inch barrel out to distance with this Eotech Exps3-4, remember, you need to aim just a little bit above, or your BDC is truer at shorter distances. So there's a couple things to think about there. But for me at 500 yards, my impacts were just a little bit low, about 10 inches. Then at 600 yards is where we really saw a drastic difference in point of impact versus point of aim with this particular setup. So at 600 yards, we did have a first round hit, very bottom edge of the plate, but then I had to adjust up and hold my 600-yard aiming point in the head to be able to land hits down low on the plate. From what I measured, they were about 24 inches low. So I needed to aim about 24 inches high at 600 yards versus where the BDC dot was. So my bullets are dropping below the BDC due to the lower velocity from the shorter barrel and the .223 pressure ammunition. So it's important to note with a BDC has a calibration. In this case, it's for 5.56 pressure, M855, out of a 14.5-inch barrel running about 2,900 feet per second. I actually chronographed this rifle shooting this .223 ammunition. Now it's at about 2576, so running quite a bit slower versus what this is calibrated for. So you think about roughly 300 feet per second, what that does to bullet drop. Slower bullet means more drop at distance, which is why my impacts landed below my BDC aiming point at each distance. Now, as I mentioned just a second ago, either remember that, so if you're going to shoot 500 yards, remember you need to aim about 10 inches high to get those bullets where you want them, or through a ballistics app, you can go in and actually true your BDC and understand what distances those dots actually represent. So in my case, I haven't run these numbers, but say that 400-yard dot might actually be a 350-yard aiming point. Maybe the 500-yard dot's a 450, etc. So through a ballistic app, and let me know in the comments if that's an exercise you want to do. It's definitely something we can do because there is a way to true your BDC to your actual setup. They peanut butter spread them when they make them, but you can still true them to make it fit your exact needs with a little bit of work in a ballistics calculator. So I'd love to hear in the comments, is that something you'd like to see? And if so, let me know. Now we're losing light, so I need to wrap this up. I appreciate you sticking around and watching this video all the way to the end. Now with that, if you enjoy this kind of content, I'd ask that you help me grow this channel. And to do that, it's going to be your interaction through likes, comments, and subscribes. So if you want to see more content like this, help me out with one of those actions. And then finally, don't forget to check me out on Instagram at Mountains Mullets America. It's a great place for us to interact. It's where I got a ton of messages around this idea, and I can give you a sneak peek of what I'm working on. So thanks for watching. Make sure to stick around and join me in my next video.